Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us again on Fantasy Sports Review. I'm Phil Hargis. It's good to see you again. Last week was another exciting week of games. It was great to be back. I've been going to so many games this year. I went to the Redskins-Eagles game, Detroit game, and then went up last weekend, 2 weekends ago actually, to Cleveland and Cincinnati. I had a good time there. It's always great to go to the games, but when you go to the games, you don't always get a chance to see what's happening there on the Red Zone channel and on the NFL Sunday Ticket and all the other games here in town. But luckily the Redskins were on bye, so they couldn't lose last week, which was great too. I'm sure that everybody saw, almost the entire nation saw, the incredible offensive explosion there in the Dallas and Denver game. That was awesome. Great fantasy points all around for almost anybody. And a couple surprises we'll talk about here shortly. But I have somebody here in studio with me. It's not Robbie. Robbie's off having dinner at Trio restaurant right now. Lucky guy. Must be nice. But we do have another stranger, not too big of a stranger here, but a stranger so far this season. Here in studio tonight, Clara Markowski is back in studio. Finally, Clara, we're even hiding, man. What's going on?
Thanks so much for having me, Phil. I know, I guess these things called jobs and school that get in the way of our fun, you know?
That stuff. I mean, is that getting in the way of your fantasy football seasons and your football viewings?
It is not, because Sunday is blocked off for football.
Good. You always got to reserve Sunday for football. It's very important. Great schedule for that. I mean, tell us how you're doing. We haven't checked in with you in a while. Are your teams doing okay? Have you been watching the show and keeping up with transactions and stuff like that?
They're doing okay. I have some big players like Adrian Peterson.
Kind of big, I think.
I was second in my fantasy draft, so I picked him up. The first guy picked CJ Spiller, who's actually doing the worst in our league. But anyway, he's just... You can't keep him healthy, so what are you going to do? Matt Ryan's okay. I mean, I still feel like I went running back heavy this year, which it's a passing year, I believe. So I think that if you went quarterbacks and wide receivers versus strong running backs, that you're probably doing a lot better. Yeah,
it's one of those catch-22s because we've been sort of taught our whole careers to go running back heavy. In every draft we approach with the fantasy season, and the NFL was really trended with their rules changes and everything else. Just offensive philosophies in general really trended towards passing friendly and quarterback friendly fantasy types of offenses, and it's been great. It almost makes that point per reception league format just really dominant towards the receivers.
I agree, and also the injuries. I feel like every year more and more running backs get hurt. They take more of the hits than anybody. I just feel like they can't seem to be healthy.
So a lot of exciting games last weekend. What did you think watching the first of all the Jets? We got to bring up the Jets. One of our good friends, Dan, is a huge Jets fan out there, and I know he's got to be excited now. They just beat the Falcons on Monday night.
He's very excited, and I kind of brought up the question to him. I was like, are the Jets really good, or is Atlanta really bad? But
both, probably. The Jets aren't really good, but Atlanta's pretty bad.
Atlanta's pretty bad, and I don't know why. I mean, you can't keep Roddy White healthy. Julio Jones is a stud. Matt Ryan is a good quarterback, but
Gonzo is phenomenal, isn't he?
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, he's one of the oldest tight ends in the league, and he's still awesome.
History of the NFL.
But I mean, they have no run game. Their defense is pretty weak, against the rookie quarterback, and they don't really have a lot of big name receivers besides Santonio Holmes. So Bilal Powell is okay, but I just feel like their defense and their run game, it really hurts them.
Yeah, it was. I think it really caught everybody by off guard. Even though Atlanta was struggling at the start of their season, I think that everybody still really expected them to really whip up on the Jets, and they really didn't. Roddy White. I mean, I know he's been struggling with his injuries and everything so far this year, but he had 2 fumbles almost, and he wasn't hitting blocks. I mean, I don't even know what he was doing, man. He better step it up, though, because now that Julio Jones is gone, he's the only show in town they have, because Harry Douglas is nothing meaningful, whatsoever.
I agree, and their running backs are going to have to step up.
And Jacquizz Rodgers did. I mean, I liked how they really stuck with him in that game, even though they weren't very effective in running the ball. They were able to stick with Jacquizz Rodgers, and he produced for you with 2 touchdowns.
He did. Because, I mean, you double coverage on Julio Jones, which Julio Jones still had a good game because he's a monster. But, when you have the double coverage on your main receivers, when your number 2 is hurt, you got to do the dump passes to the running backs.
And that was something else. If you have a guy going against Cromartie in any future game, the top receiver for any team playing the Jets, you have to bench him, because what Julio Jones was able to do was still pretty good. I think it was really that one big catch at the end of the game. He drew a couple, maybe one interference, but he also had offensive interference called against him twice in that game, I believe. And against a guy like Cromartie, I mean, he is a shutdown corner, and you can't rely on anybody playing against those guys. So if you have a team a guy playing against the Jets coming up, you really have to look at benching him. A perfect example of that we'll get to here soon will be Pittsburgh. I think Antonio Brown will be a guy you definitely have to bench this weekend. We'll get to the matchups here shortly. But anyway, let's go ahead and look at the results from last week. There was a lot of big games. Obviously, the Denver and Cowboys game was the biggest one of the day. Just insane. I mean,
I think everybody was surprised with that game. I mean, I know that Des Bryant went a few leagues that I'm not in, but I know he went number 1 overall, which I would never pick Des Bryant overall, but he's clearly producing the points.
I know. Des Bryant is one of those guys that I tried to warn everybody about preseason. I was like, do not draft this guy. I think he's going to be in for like kind of an off season. And I was also saying the same about Julio Jones. I've never really been I always thought there was too much hype surrounding both of those guys, especially coming off the year that they had last year. Des Bryant has certainly performed. Julio Jones, not as much. And obviously he's done for the year now, so he's not going to be able to produce to those levels where he was drafted to. But Dez definitely living up to all that hype, and as long as he stays healthy, he'll be right there.
Right, and I mean, you have to look at who is throwing the ball to him. You have Tony Romo, who has not been one of the elite quarterbacks in the NFL, but then he throws for 500 passing yards and 5 TDs. I mean, he's looking against Denver, and Denver doesn't have the greatest defense in the world, but
Claire, that's one of the things we
5-0.
talk about on the show all the time is you can draft a guy like Drew Brees or Aaron Rodgers or even Peyton Manning in the second or third rounds. And some idiots even draft those guys in the first rounds. It's not worth drafting that because you could get a guy like Tony Romo. He was the 11th or 12th quarterback off the board this year. He was getting drafted in kind of the same area that RG3 was. And coming off the year that RG3 had last year, I mean, obviously the injury hurt his draft value quite a bit. But you can still get a guy like Romo 12th, and overall for quarterbacks, you can still get him in the 8th to 10th round. I mean, it's pretty remarkable.
And Romo will throw some interceptions, but I mean, he's guaranteed to throw for at least 300 or 400 yards.
Good yardage, and their schedule is so juicy this year for passing matchups. So yeah, that was obviously the fantasy feast that everybody expected it to be. It was a heck of a game. I mean, it was really a lot of fun to watch. You don't see that every week. I mean,
it was too close for comfort for me.
A little too. It was nice to see Dallas lose though in the end, though.
Yes,
I thought it was great, and obviously Romo, like we expect him to do, came in and threw the costly turnover at the end of the game, which completely wipes out the 506 yards passing he had in that game. So him and Manning are at the top of that list. Cutler, Wilson, Rivers has been having a phenomenal season so far.
Rivers has, even though they lost against Oakland, he still had an awesome game.
In that midnight game that we all stayed up to watch, I'm sure, that ended at around 3 o'clock in the morning. Even though I didn't have to wake up, I think that was still impossible to stay up for, but it still was pretty cool to have. The game started at midnight, I thought was pretty cool. And moving down the list, Geno Smith, Matt Ryan, we talked about those guys. Sam Bradford was my sleeper guy. I was all over him in FanDuel last week. And he really came through. I mean, how can he not come through against the Jacksonville Jaguars? Any offensive players against Jacksonville are absolutely must-starts.
And any defense against Jacksonville is a must-start. I actually started the St. Louis Rams for my defense, and they got me 17 points.
I play defensive matchups every week. It's for sure, and the teams against Jacksonville for sure. They had a touchdown right off the bat in that game. It was great to see.
Justin Blackmon had a huge game.
Yes. Let's talk about Justin Blackmon. I have some bids on him on waivers tonight. I'm hoping I get him, man. Half an hour. I went all in on Blackmon when he was out there on the waiver wire. I think he's a great pickup. If he's out there, you can pick him up, go get him. Especially this week, man, against Denver. Chad Henne is going to pass for some yards. We'll get to our matchups here, but Blackmon is a star when he's in those games.
And Denver's been letting up a lot of points, so he's guaranteed to have 1 or 2 touchdowns. Again, Chad Henne is going to throw for some yardage, but I definitely don't see them winning that game.
So the 27-point underdogs, which is an NFL record. I mean, an average big blowout mismatchup in the NFL is usually around 17 points. So it's 10 points higher than that. One of the best offenses of all time against one of the worst offenses of all time. But I think Henne's going to make it interesting, though, man. I think they're still going to put up some points. It's going to be a blowout, and Denver's going to kill them, but it's not going to be nearly as embarrassing. It's not going to be like a 58-0 kind of game, drubbing like
and I think
some people.
It's going to be a little bit closer with Henne starting versus Gabbert.
Henne can pass for some yards and complete some passes, and plus Blackmon is coming back and he's getting healthy, like we just talked about. But yeah, there were some really surprising receivers last weekend, though. At the top of the list, Alshon Jeffrey, another one of my FanDuel specials, though. I love this guy with his matchup And he really came through and performed for me with the number one guy, 10 receptions, 200 yards, and a touchdown. It just takes a lot of talent that I have to pick that guy out of all the. You only get 3 receivers, period. And I got Alshon Jeffrey, and he's cheap too, which makes him a good
right
value.
Because I guarantee you, he's not on a lot of people's benches, let alone their fantasy team. You know what I'm saying? Another one. Can we talk about T.Y. Hilton, who was probably in about 70% of fantasy benches this week?
Mm-hmm. And Randall was on the waiver wires. I mean, Ruben Randall up there in the Giants, especially. You knew that's gonna be a good passing fantasy feast for the New York Giants. But Victor Cruz. I mean, how do you explain him getting shut down in that kind of a game against the Eagles? I mean, almost unbelievable. He stepped up.
You have to step up. When you have the big. I mean, Nick's had a great game, but Nick's is another one. He'll catch 3 80-some, 90 yards with a touchdown,
game, right?
but then he'll also get shut down with 30 yards a game. So you have to have these guys like Ruben Randall step up.
And then when they step in for the injuries, they're great guys to have. They're James Jones and all the Green Bay guys. Keenan Allen and Austin Pettis. Austin Pettis is starting to consistently hit this board here.
Who is that guy?
He's the wrong Austin. Like everybody thought that Tavon Austin was going to be the guy to have there in St. Louis, but as it turns out, it's really Austin Pettis. And this guy's getting lots of catches, and it's fine. And we're just sort of jumping around here, but I think we should go right to the receivers and. These are the real big surprises of last weekend, and it's cool that to see guys like Austin Pettis, that kind of come out of nowhere, and they're guys that you can still go out there. And I put in a bid on him tonight. I hope I get Blackman instead to pick up a guy like Pettis. He's great. Denarius Moore was available until the last couple of weeks. People picked him up, and the gem of and then plus guys coming off of injury now. You'll see guys coming off of injury. Michael Crabtree soon, and also Percy Harvin are guys you can look for on the waiver wire there.
And another thing, the greatest thing about this list is that 2 players from Jacksonville and 2 players from New York, Hakeem Nicks and Randall, and then Blackman and Cecil Shorts on the list of top wide receivers who are both 0-5.
Yeah.
It's just.
And that's the great thing about fantasy is they have tremendous value.
Right.
Here's the thing: is I can't wait to get to talk. I can't wait to start talking about matchups. Let's burn through the tight ends right here. Julius Thomas. This guy's been doing it week in and week out. He's an absolute must-start. He's a top 5 tight end right now overall for the season. Witten, Davis, Cumberland kind of came out of nowhere for the Jets. I put a bid in on him because I have my top tight end in that one league was like Zach Miller or that other clown from KC. I can't remember his darn name right now.
Jimmy Graham, no surprise. Tony Gonzalez, no surprise.
Yes.
Brent Selleck had a big game, and I think he's starting now, but I think when the season started, he was like their number 2 or number 3 tight end, and he had that amazing catch in the end zone. Did you see that during that Giants-Eagles game? I mean, it was almost looked like the David Tyree helmet catch.
I saw that game. I'm sure I saw it.
It was awesome.
It's not sticking out, but I'm sure it was awesome. But Levine, Toy Lolo?
I don't know.
That's the player of the week right there, Levine Toilolo. Let's move on. We're the running backs are pretty much the same usual suspects. We already talked about Jacquizz Rodgers, and I think Danny Woodhead is a good pickup at this point. If you can still get him, he's probably gone in most leagues.
Picked him up last week, so that was definitely a pick.
Nice pickup. But you
yep.
don't play PPR leagues, so it's not as nice.
But he's still 13 points for the, and I think Danny Woodhead's a good guy if your starter Adrian Peterson or your
bye week filler.
Yeah, or your Alfred Morris are on a bye.
What do you think about Chris Johnson? Here's a trade, Claire. I want to get your opinion on this. I traded this week in a league. It's not PPR, so you should be very familiar with it. So it's basically based on touchdowns only.
Right.
I needed some help at receiver. I had some really bad receivers out there, so I traded wide receiver. I traded Reggie Wayne. I traded let me start this whole thing over again here because I'm getting completely screwed up here. I traded Frank Gore because I had tons of running backs. I got Peterson on that team. I traded Frank Gore and Eddie Royal, who I was going to waive anyway, away for Reggie Wayne and Chris Johnson. So it's Gore and Royal for Wayne and Johnson.
I probably wouldn't have done that.
You wouldn't have done that?
I wouldn't have done that. I would have kept Gore way over Chris Johnson, because Chris Johnson had what? We talked about this earlier. He had 1, maybe 2 good seasons, and I say this every time he gets drafted. And he goes.
He always goes higher.
He goes higher than he should, and and then everybody complains about him every year. All the owners that have him, Chris Johnson's not doing anything. Chris Johnson's not doing anything. Well, I told him.
I know. A lot of people are still think that guy has it in him. They've seen what he's capable of doing, and they want to draft him. For some reason, I think that his schedule is favorable for the rest of the season, so that's kind of what I'm banking on. And I also think that San Francisco has a very tough schedule going on. And I wasn't really happy about making the trade, but I really needed the wide receiver help. My best receiver is Cecil Shorts.
Ooh.
So it's pretty weak. So Wayne's a little bit of a help there. Again, I want to thank you guys for tuning in to Fantasy Sports Review tonight. We are doing a combined show tonight. Steve Mullen is directing for us, and he couldn't be out here. We're doing a combined show with SportScope. It's always good to share the airwaves with them. Steve and whatever his guest of the week is, Robbie, Clara, Natalie. Sometimes those guys all fill in and do a great job for SportScope. SportScope is on a bi-weekly basis here, and you can always catch it on Channel 10 in some of your primetime viewing hours. Steve Mullen, thank you very much for directing the show tonight and allowing us to share your time with SportScope for Fantasy Sports Review. But Clara, we got a lot of matchups to get to this week and about half the show to do it. So let's get right into things. Thursday night show. We're actually taping on Wednesday night, so we don't have any sneak peek teasers. We can pretend to pull these things off.
That's exciting. We don't
here.
have to have Robbie on his phone checking up the scores when we're in the studio.
He's Robbie Castro. My best Robbie Castro imitation right there. Ugh. So he's always keeping us up to date on what's going on his cell phone. He's the master of the iPhone. Shine boy, master of the iPhone. So the Thursday night game this week is pretty interesting, especially for NFC East guys here, New York Giants, and go to Chicago, where Chicago gets to kick their little butts, their little blue butts, gray butts, I guess they are, all over Soldier Field there. That should be pretty awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if you have Chicago D, start him. If you have Jay Cutler, I mean, Jay Cutler's not going to be, your big go-to quarterback, but if you have someone like, who's on a bye this week? The Dolphins. And if you say you have Matt Ryan, which I do, I have Matt Ryan on a bye, so I'm going to start Jay Cutler against the New York Giants. And Chicago D, I mean, Eli Manning has been. He had an okay week last week, but he's been one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL with his interceptions.
His okay week was number 12 on the list. I mean, he's just been terrible.
Right.
He's almost a bench. You can find better guys like Terrell Pryor on the waiver wire right now. I agree with you. Chicago defense may be the start of the week, except for Denver. They might even sneak in there and do better than Denver, just because Denver's been one of those weird things where everybody expects them to be like the number one defense, and they'll probably end up like number 8 or 9 or something like that. But yeah, all Chicago guys, Forte. You got to start everybody. Alshon Jeffrey could easily do 200 yards again against the New York Giants. It wouldn't be surprising to me. And then the Giants guys. I mean, you're going to start your usual guys. No running backs. You want to start for the Giants. And you might want to bench Manning. I think the only guy who can really start for the Giants right now are Cruz and Nix. And maybe Randall if you're really in a spot. Let's move on to the next game. This is another one. Green Bay, a lot of fancy guys against Baltimore.
I think Green Bay has this one in the bag after that performance against Detroit last week. It was a shaky start for Aaron Rodgers, but he managed to do well. But I mean, Baltimore, they lost. They squeaked one past the Dolphins because personally, I don't think the Dolphins are that good this year. I think they've had an easy schedule. But Baltimore loses to Buffalo and then come back and barely beats the Dolphins. Baltimore, they traded so many players for Joe Flacco to have his contract, and I don't think that was the best move. So I think Green Bay is just going to destroy Baltimore.
It really looks like that should be the case, and it's hard to see any other outcome than Green Bay completely ass-thrashing the Baltimore Ravens there. For Baltimore, I think Torrey Smith is probably the only guy. Ray Rice, I mean, maybe in a ball control kind of game. You're not going to bench Rice if you have him on your team anyway.
Torrey Smith, I actually have Torrey Smith.
He's a stud.
He's my starter.
He's been great.
So, he's been great. Start Torrey Smith, but that's it.
Yeah, all the Green Bay Packers. I mean,
don't sit Baltimore D.
See, here's the thing: is I like the Packers. I know they're one of the best offenses. I never know which one of those guys to draft, and if I draft them, I wouldn't really know which ones to start. I mean, James Jones comes out and does that. I mean, Finley is going to be Cobb. Is going to be Jordy Nelson. Is going to be. It would drive me crazy trying to figure out which of those guys to start.
Yeah, and honestly, I have Randall Cobb, and he gets 10-plus points every week. So
you're happy with that?
You got to start him. I mean, Aaron Rodgers can light up the field and throw for 4 or 5 touchdowns to every single guy out there.
They're not going to run the ball.
Right.
There's no chance they're going to run. Although Eddie Lacy came on and had about 100 yards last week.
If one of your starting running backs is out, start Eddie Lacy. But other than that, I think that you start the wide receivers.
I'm so not a fan of Eddie Lacy at all.
Not
at all.
Either.
Here's another S game coming up here. Philadelphia, Tampa Bay. Yeah, Tampa Bay is starting that Glennon guy, Scott Glennon or Mike Glennon or whatever Glenn Libet, Glenn Fittich.
The Josh Freeman
I'd rather
replacement.
have the Scots than the quarterback on my team, personally. But the Philadelphia matchup is pretty favorable there for some of those guys. With Nick Foles. I mean, Foles is a guy you can pick up on the waiver wire right now, and this may or may not be a good place to stick him in. I think he could have a pretty good game against Tampa Bay.
And honestly, I picked up Philadelphia D just recently on the waiver wire because that's my strategy this year is to pick up all the defenses that play the horrible teams.
Yes.
Because I really can't see Tampa Bay. I can't see Tampa Bay doing anything this year. New quarterback, he's not familiar with the system as well as Josh Freeman was. I think you got to go Philadelphia. And of course, you got to start LaShawn McCoy. I think you start
Deshaun Jackson. He's a top 5 guy this week. Yeah, I agree with you. Tampa Bay. I mean, Doug Martin's. You're not going to bench that guy because you drafted him in the first round, and he should have a pretty good game against Philadelphia. But in a FanDuel kind of system, there's no way in hell I'm going to choose to start that guy. I'm going to choose anybody else I want to. So that's that. I mean, I think even if Philadelphia's defense was going up against Josh Freeman, I still think that would have been a pretty good start for their defense there. Here we go. Your Jets against Pittsburgh. This
Jets.
is going to be a really you're sort of Jets by association, I think. Jets and Pittsburgh, a game that nobody wants to watch.
Yeah, we actually, my buddy is a diehard Pittsburgh fan. He's coming down to Arlington on Sunday and he's going to watch the game with us. But I mean, I don't know. I don't think that Pittsburgh's going to lose every game. I don't. And I think that if they're going to win their first win, why couldn't it be the Jets?
Well, we were talking about that before. Antonio Brown will be probably up against Cromartie, so I think you have to bench him. And yeah, you're right. This is a great spot for the Jets for the Pittsburgh coming off against the Jets. The Jets coming off the short week. They're due to lose. Pittsburgh will be. Pittsburgh's not really that bad. I mean, they're bad. Le'Veon Bell, I think, is coming on. I think he's may have a hard time running the ball against the Jets, but he's still good. I have him on a couple teams. I'm actually really excited to see if he can do well, and then maybe I can use him for some trade bait in some other leagues. But I kind of want to hold on to him too because I think he could be a pretty good sleeper. Anyway, moving on, we have Carolina, Minnesota. These are 2 more crappy teams that nobody really wants to see. I don't really want to see these 2 teams play, but I do have Peterson and a couple of side bets on how well he's going to do. I don't think he's going to be the number 1 running back overall at the end of the season.
God, and Cam Newton, what happened to that guy? Last year you think is it the sophomore slump? But
last year
that guy just. But is it their fault? They have decent. They have Greg Olsen. They have Steve Smith. They have a decent running back core, Tolbert and Williams. And is that, at that point it's like, is it the head coach's fault? Probably.
Somebody's got a problem.
I don't think that he's going to make it through the season, honestly.
They have no excuse with that kind of talent that they have on there. Let's move on to the next game here as we get pretty excited for some of the better games that have to be coming on here. Oakland and Kansas City. I love these AFC West games, and this game, Kansas City at 5-0. That's a surprise to a lot of people. I think they're a good team, and I'm surprised to see them doing that well, but I'm not surprised to see them winning games.
No, I'm not either, and I definitely think that. And Alex Smith, I've never really been a huge fan of Alex Smith because I think he's a quarterback that is not going to win the game for you, but he's also not going to lose the game for you.
Exactly.
He's decent. But I think that, I think that Philadelphia is kicking themselves for getting rid of Andy Reid, and I know that he hasn't had a winning record.
We're glad of that here in Washington.
But Andy Reid is a great coach, and and sometimes you need that. Sometimes you need to go to a new team, have new players, and get everything together. And he's doing a hell of a job.
Amazing. He's got great talent surrounding him, and like you said, Alex Smith. He's not like a Michael Vick or anything, but he will win those games, and he will make the costly turnovers at the end of those things. St. Louis and Houston. Houston's coming off that weird week where the fans went and tried to heckle Matt Schaub at the house.
Well, maybe it was
allegedly.
But again, Matt Schaub. What I would be irritated too if I was a Houston fan because he just can't get it together. And when we were watching that San Francisco game, I was actually defending him, Matt Schaub's, let's give him another chance. And then what does he do? He throws a pick six the first or second play of the game. You can't plan that out.
This will be 5 in a row if he does it. I think.
And they have an awesome team. Andre Johnson, Arian Foster. Their defense is decent. It's just, I think Houston is the shock of the team, of the NFL right now.
It's shocking because they do have a great defense and they really do have a great offense. They should be doing better than that. Maybe it's a coaching issue once again, but I think it's safe to start your Rams defense if you still have them. You haven't tried to upgrade to one of those other teams that we talked about. Let's move down the list a little bit to some of these better games. We'll go back to these ones one more time here, but there's a couple games here at the bottom we just got to get to. Let's start off with Washington and Dallas.
I'm very excited about that game. We had our four preseason games for RG3 because he didn't start any preseason. So I'm looking at those as preseason games for us. We had our win against Oakland. We're coming off of a bye. He's well rested. And you know what? Dallas had that huge game against Denver, but you play, when you're divisional games, you play each other differently. You know, it's going to be a close game, and I think we're going to squeak this one out.
Dude, I think we're going to win by over 10 points. I got it. I'm on the record here. Oh, man, I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it was 38-27 is the score that I predicted for this game. For all those things, I think the Dallas blew their wad, left everything out there on the field. Everything they had went into that Denver game. And it's not really a short week. They had that afternoon game, but they just that is a physically tolling. There's a physical toll on those players at the end of that kind of game. And watching the extra week, the bye week, like you were saying, is a huge advantage. And the division rivalry. I was at that game, Redskins-Dallas, the last game in Dallas-Texans Stadium. We were like 10-point dogs, and we actually beat them in that game. So it's going to happen again. 38-27 is the official score. As we move here towards the end, there's a couple games here to talk to you. I think New Orleans and New England is the big game, though.
Honestly, I think that. I mean, can you name anybody in New England's backfield? Can you name anybody?
I can name all of them. LeGarrette Blount, Brandon Bolden, Stephen Ridley, Shane Vereen coming back. I mean, I just had to answer the question.
LeGarrette Blount would be, a number 3 in anybody else's team. Their injuries are killing them.
They're useless. The running backs are
and Tom Brady
useless.
has no one to throw to. And I mean, with
Gronk maybe coming back.
2 points.
Maybe.
Well, he's still questionable. They don't think he's going to come back. But I mean, New Orleans, they have their coach back. They have Drew Brees. They have their receivers. Their defense is decent this year.
Even Pierre Thomas is playing good.
I mean, I just think it's going to be probably a.
But New Orleans, man, they travel. They play outside the dome. I mean, New England. This is a Bill Belichick signature win here. Nobody gives them a chance, and they're probably going to go in there and embarrass New Orleans, 45-10.
Yeah. You want to make that bet?
Yeah, I'll bet it.
Okay.
I get the.
I have New Orleans. You have the New England.
Drinks are on you next week. Okay.
Sounds good.
I like it. We have a little gambling act. We don't endorse illegal gambling on the show, but it's just for a couple of friendly glasses of water at the local watering hole. Before the show, we'd like to go to some places here. Let's start bringing these guys in on like where we're going before the show, so they can come hang out. It's a lot of fun. Bye weeks this week, Atlanta, Miami. Steve Mullen is on bye this week as we're covering his show for Sports Scope. It's always fun to fill in for his airtime here. Claire, it's great to have you back on the show.
Phil, thanks for having me. I had a blast.
Always good to see you again. We'll see you next week, and we will see all you guys next week on Fantasy Sports Review in the Sports Scope time slot. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.